Hello and welcome. I am Laura Edinger, one of the service leaders for today, and I invite you into worship. The Reverend Tony Johnson was not able to lead worship today as he is healing from a non-COVID related health matter. As we begin this service, please lift him up in thought for continued health and healing. Although we cannot meet in the church building due to the need for physical distancing, there are many programs to strengthen and serve members and friends of the church. Every Sunday, when we are not in the building, there is a live virtual coffee hour and a half following the service from 11:30 a.m. until 1 o'clock p.m. Please read news you can use and other emails you receive from the church, and please check the website regularly for updates. Please note the times when the minister is available via Zoom for you to check in and talk. And please send your joy or sorrow via the link in the email you received, and indicate whether you give permission for it to be read in the next Sunday service. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whomever you love, whatever you do for a living, you are welcome at the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg. I invite those of you at home to light a chalice, a candle, or whatever you choose to serve as your chalice at home. We light the chalice as a light to guide our going and coming and our staying safe in place, as a symbol of the warmth of welcome, as a flame to light up the world beyond that which we already know, as a light of hope in these dark times, and as a hearth around which we gather as a community. Please join in the reading of the unison affirmation.
Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is our gift. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to speak our truths in love, and to help one another.
Please join in singing our opening hymn, My Life Flows On.
everyone. For those who don't know me, I am Amy Firestein, the RE Committee Chair and current RE Coordinator for UCH. I want to start out this morning by wishing all of you out there who are mothers a very happy Mother's Day. This morning's topic is about the idea that we are all in the same boat. And when trying to find a story, I came across one I had borrowed from our UCH library earlier this month. It's one that I had never read before, but when I was going through the books last night, trying to find something to do, something about this one just spoke to me. The story is called The Worst Person in the World by James Stevenson. In an old house, in a yard full of poison ivy, lived the worst person in the world. He lived all alone in a terrible mess. Most of the day, he sat in a very uncomfortable chair and listened to old records he didn't like. Some of the time, he watched from a window so that if anybody came near his house, he could yell, "Go away!" But nobody ever came near his house. One morning, the worst person got up and looked outside. It was a beautiful day. "If there's anything I hate, it's spring," he said, and pulled down the shade. He ate a lemon for breakfast. "Ugh," he said, "too sweet." He went out for a walk and hit flowers with his umbrella. His neighbors were standing on the sidewalk smiling and talking. He turned off into a field so he wouldn't meet them. Timmy and Tony and Celeste were searching for their baseball in the tall grass. "Have you seen our baseball, Mr. Worst?" asked Timmy. "Certainly not," he said, as he was looking right at it. He went into the woods. Birds were singing in the trees. He told them to shush. He sat down under a big tree. He thought he was alone, but then he heard something moving. He stood up and saw a large creature. "Howdy," said the creature. "Who are you?" demanded the worst person. "I'm the ugliest thing in the world," said the creature, "but just call me Ugly." "You certainly are ugly," said the worst person. "Oh, I know," said Ugly, "but if you've got a pleasing personality, that's all that counts." "Rubbish," said the worst. "I'm parched," said Ugly. "Do you happen to know where I could find a little lemonade?" "No," said the worst. "Don't you have any lemons at your house?" said Ugly. "I'm not sure," said the worst. "Well, let's go take a look," said Ugly. "Lead the way." They came to the worst person's house. "You certainly have a terrible-looking place," said Ugly. "Watch out for the poison ivy," said the worst. Ugly went into the kitchen. "You've got lots of lemons," he said. "Don't take too many," said the worst. Ugly popped 3 lemons into his mouth. There was a loud crunch, and then he drank a glass of water. "Delicious," he said. "You know what?" said Ugly. "If we got this dump cleaned up, we could invite a lot of people over and have a pretty good party." "People?" said the worst. "Party?" "Oh, nothing fancy," said Ugly, grabbing a rag and brushing away cobwebs. "A little ice cream, balloons, favors, cake." "Not in my house," said the worst. Ugly gathered the dishes that were piled around the house. "What are you doing?" said the worst. "Getting ready for the big shebang," said Ugly. He washed the dishes, he swept the floors, and he cleaned the windows. "Now the lawn," said Ugly as he went outside. "Stop doing that," yelled the worst. "Don't worry," called Ugly. "I don't get poison ivy." At the end of the day, the lawn was all cleared. "I'm pooped," said Ugly. "Mind if I get some shut-eye?" There's no place for you to sleep, said the worst. Please don't go to any trouble, said Ugly. I can sleep anywhere. And he flopped down on the floor. You get started on the invitations for tomorrow, he said. See you in the morning. And then Ugly began to snore. The worst person went to bed, but the noise of snoring filled the house and kept him awake. Invitations, he said. Shebang. It was nearly dawn when he finally got to sleep. Late the next morning, when the worst got up, the house was silent. Ha! He said. The creature has gone away. He went downstairs. Oh, no, he said. The whole downstairs was decorated for a party. Ugly and Timmy and Celeste and Tony had arrived, carrying baseball gloves. What's this? Said the worst. First we're having a baseball game, then the party, said Ugly. That way everybody will work up an appetite. The worst went into the house. How do you like the decorations? Said Ugly, following him in. I hate the decorations. I hate the balloons. I hate the ice cream. I hate the cake, the favors, plates, the hats, and everything else. Gee, I would have asked you what you wanted, but you were asleep, said Ugly. I'll tell you what I want, said the worst. I want no party, no baseball, no children, and no you. Goodbye. And he went upstairs. Worst sat in his room for a while. He could hear Ugly moving around downstairs. And then he heard Ugly and the children playing baseball far away down the street. They were laughing and shouting. The worst put his hands over his ear. After a long time, he got up and went downstairs. The party decorations were all gone. Ugly had put everything back the way it was before. The house was dark and messy. In the kitchen, the ice cream was melting in the sink. The worst went into the living room and put on a record. It sounded awful. He turned it off. He looked around the kitchen. I better get used to this again, he said. This is the way it's going to be. In a dark corner behind a pile of dishes, he noticed a striped party hat. Imagine wearing one of those things, he said. I would have looked like a fool. Then he thought, of course, everybody else would have been wearing one too. He picked up the hat and went over to an old cracked mirror. Slowly, he put the hat on his head. He said. In the field down the street, Timmy was at bat, and Celeste was pitching. Strike two, yelled Ugly. Celeste wound up and threw the next pitch. Timmy swung as hard as he could. Crack! The ball sailed up and across the field and fell into some trees and bushes near the street. Home run! Cried Ugly. That ball is gone, said Celeste. We'll never find it now, said Tony. I guess the game is over. Suddenly there was a rustling in the bushes, and out came the worst person. He was wearing a striped party hat, and in his hand he held the baseball. Is this yours? He called. The children cheered. The worst gave the ball to Ugly. Thanks, said Ugly. Now we can finish the game. No, you can't, said the worst. We can't, said Tommy. Why not? Because if you do, said the worst, then all the ice cream will melt, and the party will be ruined. Party, said the children. Party, said Ugly. Well, don't stand there dawdling, said the worst, and he marched off down the street with Ugly and the children running all along behind. So, before I read the story, I said it just spoke to me with regards to the idea of us all being in the same boat. The first main character, Worst, is isolated. Perhaps he's isolated by choice, or perhaps because circumstances we don't know about led him to decide he preferred to be alone. And then there is Ugly, who tries very hard to make Worst's life better. I think in a lot of ways, being in isolation is making us all very grumpy. And we long for the parties and fun and games with friends that we have all come to love in the past and will once again look forward to once isolation is over. But I also think that while Worst ended up joining the party, it took him a while to realize that's what he really wanted to do. I think in a lot of ways, many of us are going to be very reluctant to want to rejoin the social world again. But in the end, we will, because deep down, the need to be social and have fun together is very strong. And now I want to read a little something I found that goes out to all of those who find themselves in the mom boat, struggling during this current time to find new ways to be there for our families. So moms, close your eyes and take a moment for yourselves as I read a poem called Mom by Anonymous. Mom, each day I get older and perhaps a bit more wise. And Mom, the more I understand, the more I realize that you've been simply wonderful since I was very small. And I've been blessed for certain with the finest mom of all. So happy Mom's Day to everybody, and to everybody else. May we enjoy our time in our boats and know that we're not alone.
In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, sorrow falling down like rain, I await the sun again. I choose love. I choose love. In the midst of war, I choose peace. In the midst of war, I choose peace. In the midst of war, hate and anger keeping score, I will seek the good once more. I choose peace. I choose peace. When my world falls down, I will rise. When my world falls down, I will rise. When my world falls down, explanations can't be found. I will climb to holy ground. I will rise. I will rise. In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, sorrow falling down like rain, I await the sun again. I choose love. I choose love.
This morning's reading actually comes from my chiropractor, who I thought wrote it, but it turns out he just got it from the internet himself. It's titled, "We Are Not in the Same Boat, Just the Same Storm." It says, "I heard that we are all in the same boat, but it's not like that. We are in the same storm, but not in the same boat. Your ship could be shipwrecked, and mine might not be, or vice versa. For some, quarantine is optimal, a moment of reflection, of reconnection, easy in flip-flops with a cocktail or coffee. For others, this is a desperate financial and family crisis. For some that live alone, they are facing endless loneliness. While for others, it is peace, rest, and time with their mother, father, sons, and daughters. With the $600 weekly increase in unemployment, some are bringing in more money to their households than they were when working. Others are working more hours for less money due to pay cuts or loss in sales. Some families of four just received $3,400 from the stimulus, while other families of four saw zero. Some were concerned about getting a certain candy for Easter, while others were concerned if there would be enough bread, milk, and eggs for the weekend. Some want to go back to work because they don't qualify for unemployment and are running out of money. Others want to kill those who break the quarantine. Some are home spending 2 to 3 hours a day helping their child with online schooling, while others are spending 2 to 3 hours a day to educate their children on top of a 10 to 12-hour workday. Some have experienced the near death of the virus. Some have already lost someone from it, and some are not sure if their loved ones are going to make it. Others don't believe this is a big deal. Some have faith in God and expect miracles during this 2020. Others say the worst is yet to come. So friends, we are not in the same boat. We are going through a time when our perceptions and needs are completely different. Each of us will emerge in our own way from this storm. It is very important to see beyond what is seen at first glance. Not just looking, actually seeing. We are all on different ships during this storm, experiencing a very different journey. Thus ends the reading from an unknown author. Today in this congregation, someone is hurting or in sorrow. Today in this congregation, someone is anxious because of events in the world. Today in this congregation, someone is lonely. Today in this congregation, someone is filled with joy and wants to celebrate. For all the fear and sorrow in the world today, there are still moments of joy. A candle of sorrow this morning for the community surrounding the Harrisburg Improv Theater, which lost beloved actor, comedian, and friend Cliff Ash this week. Libby Tisdale reminds us that today marks 1 year since we lost Ned Smith. We have heard the words of the people who have placed their joy and sorrow before this community and before the holy. The words they have shared are words of love and trust. Love for those whose names were spoken, and love for those who hear. Trust in the acceptance of this community, and trust in the continuity of life. When there is birth, life goes on. When there is death, life goes on. When there is joy, life goes on. When there is sorrow, life goes on. May we always live in trust and in love, that all joy might be shared and all sorrow comforted. This is our prayer.
As you can tell, I'm in the same boat with our congregation's worship team, which is led by our minister, Reverend Tony Johnson. And so this service is a team effort. We need also to remember and appreciate the people who helped the team so this service could happen, like Kel Kyle, who worked with me to record this sermon, and with others to record their parts, and Bill Brown, who edited the many pieces into a coherent service. We are so glad you are in the boat with us. My mother had a variety of sayings for many occasions. While I clearly recall her telling us kids, we're all in the same boat, I don't recall her ever expanding on that saying to explain what she meant. She probably thought it was obvious. As you can tell, the phrase has stuck with me. When I think about being in the same boat, my first questions are, who with? And how do I get along with them? As I've gotten older, and I hope wiser, I've added, will we be safe? I would like to have recorded this sermon while seated in my old sailboat, or better yet, the Grumman canoe my family enjoyed for years, to make a point. Both boats demanded cooperation from all on board, or the boat would tip, or worse. We all needed to cooperate to keep the boat balanced, or risk getting wet. Incidentally, I named my sailboat Balanced because that concept has been important in my life for 3 reasons. 1, as a budgeting instructor for many years, I knew and taught that budgets should always be balanced. 2, as a lay community minister serving as a prison chaplain, I help people in prison and the work release center I serve to get their lives in balance. And 3, to make it all work, I need to keep my own life in balance. On our only ocean cruise, Nan and I were in the Holland America Line's Statendam with about 1,100 other passengers, all strangers to us. We didn't interact with them much except for trips to the formal dining room or really good meals, which necessitated our going through the casino bar, which seemed to be open 24 hours a day. To our dismay, it seemed to be the only smoking permitted space on the ship. Thinking back, it seems like management made sure we had to go that way in hopes we would stop for a drink or to gamble or both. So we held our breath and walked as briskly as possible, trying not to gasp too audibly when we reached good fresh air and inhaled deeply. We weren't smokers, to be sure, but we had to live and let live with those folks who were in the same boat with us. Being in the same boat implies connection with fellow passengers, but it's not mandatory. For example, Pennsylvania Department of Health Secretary Rachel Levine sounded a bit like a UU this past Monday in her regular press conference when she responded to a question about a county with relatively few COVID-19 cases except in the nursing homes and long-term care facilities. Can't those places be reported separately from the rest of the county? The questioner wanted to know, with a clear expectation that the rest of the county could then be elevated to yellow and the reopening process could begin. They didn't see the nursing homes and long-term care facilities and the staff who work there as being in the same boat. No, she responded, we're all interconnected. As you might imagine, Nan and I appreciate her point of view. The connection with others in the boat calls for balance in our contribution. Not necessarily exactly equal, but balanced. My experience from a Boy Scout summer camp when I was in high school illustrated that need vividly. As part of the camp experience, I got to work with other older scouts to build and use a coracle, a round boat made of a lightweight frame of flexible branches covered with a waterproof skin that's been around since prehistoric times. I teamed up with another scout equally inexperienced, and together we learned by doing. After making a donut-shaped frame 5 or 6 feet across, we tied the sticks with yards and yards of binder twine, wrapped the tarp around the frame, and launched our creation into a creek. It floated! We and the other pairs loaded our packs, and using borrowed canoe paddles, we paddled down the stream, learning as we went. And we learned a big lesson. Unless we paddled more or less equally, the coracle went around in circles rather than making progress. My teammate had apparently expected a relaxing floating vacation, but he was moved out of his reverie by my hollering at him to paddle, since the other coracles were leaving us behind and I was tired of going around in circles. Thinking back, it might have helped if we talked about what we expected to happen, but that wasn't my approach. I was a teenage boy who did stuff without a lot of forethought. Doing was much more fun than taking time to work out how to do it. I think we both learned that being together in a small boat means you have to communicate and work together. If you've ever been in a work or volunteer situation where the group seemed to be going around in circles rather than making progress, perhaps part of the problem was an imbalance in the efforts of the participants, and that is often due to uneven degrees of buy-in. I've learned that buy-in is needed before effort is expected because people don't exert themselves when they haven't bought into the task at hand. And people, sometimes including me, don't always realize what it means to be in the same boat, do they? Have you ever been in a small boat that capsized? Nan and I have, and we were wearing life jackets just in case. To summarize, we were in my little sailboat on a small lake west of Watkins Glen, New York, on a sunny, breezy day. But we were going slower and slower because the boat's centerboard, which sticks down below the hull and is needed to keep it from tipping, was catching more and more aquatic weed. I knew what would solve the problem. Retract the board briefly, but I didn't stop to think about possible unintended consequences. What could possibly go wrong? So I pulled the board up and saw a wad of weeds float away. Hooray! But suddenly a puff of wind knocked the boat over and Nan and I were in the water just like that. Besides wearing our life jackets, Nan and I were and are good swimmers, but this was not part of my plan for the day. Luckily, a pontoon boat was nearby out for a day on the water. It zoomed over and helped Nan out of the water, and then its passengers and my dripping wife and her relatives on shore watched as I got the boat upright. I wanted to sail back to the dock we had started from, but was prevailed on to accept the tow from the nice strangers. We never got their names, but as I said, it's a small lake and people help each other out as a matter of course. This was a situation where I learned a lot all at once after the learning was needed, like think about consequences before I act, and consult with others in the boat before taking a step that could and would hugely destabilize the boat. After all, being in the same boat should be accompanied by talking things through before acting, wouldn't you think? Now I do. Back then I was impulsive and we both got wet as a result, and we're lucky that it was no worse. Some other learnings about boats are worth thinking about this morning, like my experience my freshman year in college when I was training to row in the university's 8-oared crew. As my teammates got better and more synchronized in our movements, rowing more and more smoothly, we sometimes approached a Zen-like state of mind where we and the boat became one. It didn't always happen, but when it did, it was a good day and the experience was memorable. A maxim I used to see every morning as I arrived at the Forum building behind the Capitol where I worked for many years has stuck with me. There are many wise sayings chiseled into the stone up near the roof line on the back of the building. The one I especially noticed said, "He who will not answer to the rudder will answer to the rock." Remember, these were chiseled in the early 1930s before inclusive language made its appearance. It reminded me that I needed to consciously direct my life, or I would wish that I had. I recall sharing that wisdom from time to time with the Chapel Talk pastoral counseling group I used to lead with inmates in Dauphin County Prison, where I have served as volunteer chaplain since 2005. Even though not all the inmates in the group were familiar with boats, the handout I prepared for them had illustrations of the ideas I wanted the men to engage with, and they usually got the point, eventually, either from me or from another inmate in our circle. As you might imagine, all the guys had experiences where they didn't direct their lives and hit a figurative rock as a result. Some were okay to talk about the experience, others were not, and that was okay. One of my first Chapel Talk groups brought this home when I suggested that I had a lot in common with the men in the group. At this point, the inmate beside me grinned and said, Well, except maybe for impulse control. Little did he know. Most of us can look back on times when we were not paying proper attention to the likely result of what we were doing. In these pandemic times, it seems there are an oversupply of rocks to encounter and steer away from, but few rudders to help us steer a course that will be safe for us all. The other saying I want to share was of particular interest to me when I was sailing, and since it has been attributed to both Dolly Parton and Jimmy Dean, I got curious, where did it come from? A little research disclosed that it has been around since the 1850s. I cannot control the direction of the wind, but I can set my sails to get where I want to go. Any number of times I found the wind did not blow my sailboat in the direction I needed to go, but as I learned more about setting my sails, I learned to use the wind to my advantage. When I was learning to sail a sailboard, that is, our son Rob's windsurfer, it got pretty tricky, but I persevered and got it to go where I needed to go, eventually. Sadly, I can recall stories from Caribbean resorts where vacationers will learn enough to sail away on a sailboard, but not enough to return. And the result was sometimes disastrous. There was no one in the boat to help them when they needed help. We as a congregation, we as a state, we as a country, and we as a world cannot control the direction of the winds of fate, but we can control our actions by setting our figurative sails appropriately. Since we are seldom of the same mind, though, agreeing on what is appropriate is a daunting and challenging task. And so there are many implications to being in the same boat. You and I and the folks over there and people we haven't met, we are all interconnected whether we like it or not. It is clear from both Governor Wolf's and Secretary Levine's press conferences that they are trying to communicate that we are all interconnected. We are all in the same boat. The reality of our interconnection is a major lesson of this pandemic, one I hope we don't forget. Sadly, the people who demonstrate in public about the need to reopen regardless of the consequences don't seem to get it. The politicians who want to reopen business before the pandemic is under control don't seem to get it. But we're in the same boat, like it or not, and we want the boat to carry us all safely. Maybe that's what my mother meant. May it be so. Namaste, and blessed be.
Even as you are separated and sitting in your own homes today, the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg is still a freely gathered church of free people. The church is created, sustained, and supported by you. The ministry continues even when the building is closed. There's a link for contributing to today's plate collection in the video description below. You may have to click on the words "Show More" to see it. The same link is in the email that went out to members this morning. Each month, we share half of the Sunday plate collection with a local nonprofit organization. Our partner in sharing this month is the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank. The Central Pennsylvania Food Bank serves 27 counties across Pennsylvania. An affiliate of Feeding America and Feeding Pennsylvania, the food bank maintains healthy food hub locations in Harrisburg and in Williamsport to serve the geographically dispersed community and distributes food via a large network of local partner agencies. Your financial support and commitment really matter. Please be generous.
Service of
This is a time to pause and think about who may be in the same boat with us. It might be friends or family or strangers or maybe people we disagree with. No matter who they are, we can think about their inherent worth and dignity.
Stay safe. Amen. Blessed be.